Hello, and welcome to Khyber Shards, a 5th edition actual play show set in the Eberron campaign world. It being Friday, we've got a KSA, and we are joined by Casey. Hey,
Hello. Should probably put my microphone in front of my face, not over
that's
there.
the traditional placement of the microphone is to the front of the person, but
It's
you do
important to
you.
question tradition, okay?
It is, that's true. Just because we've always done it that way doesn't make it the right way to do it. Um, so we have just a handful of questions here. But Mia would like to know, how did it feel to be the person responsible for my first experience as a GM dealing with Speak with Plants? And how do you feel about Jeffrey with respect to your giving him sentience and then ripping it away?
Wow, that a lot of feelings regarding all of those things. um it's so cheesy, but I thought it was really cool. Like you've been a GM for so long. Um and and so to be able, like, for you to still have new experiences, like, how that's just cool within the game that
Yeah.
you're able to do that. It's definitely speaks to D&D's, you know, infinite playability.
Mm-hmm.
So that was very cool. And then I have spoken a little bit about this already, but I like my insecurity in playing, and so to be the player to provide that opportunity, I thought it was kind of cool.
Yeah.
How did you feel about playing a plant?
Um, it was really, I think the weird thing was realizing that it wasn't like Speak with Animals, because it's relatively easy to speak with animals because you can suddenly communicate to the animal. And so what's happening is obviously not actually happening in words. It isn't like Cal starts speaking in common and we're just having a
Right.
conversation with the cat. But this is you are imbuing the plants with sufficient sentience to have a conversation. And so it's, there are lots of ways one could do it, but in the moment I went for silly, and I think it worked.
No, I appreciate it because, if you, there are so many ways that you could do it. You could
Mhm.
go super dark. um, and so it must be hard to judge in that moment, like all of the nuances, and you can't
Mhm.
acknowledge all of them in that, you know, 5-second conversation. But you have to pick something and go with it.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, and I mean, is it you go, yeah, mystical with it, where you're experiencing what River experiences when she talks to trees, or something different. And I don't know, just the idea of just talking as the plant um seemed funny. And then of course you guys went with like a really really ridiculously mundane name, and it just rolled. It was fun. No, that was very fun.
It was fun. And
Yes.
also, to answer your second question, Mia, I didn't love ripping it away, as you put it. Um, Shade has some guilt about that, but you know, in Shade's true Shade form, she's just gonna ignore that part.
Sure, sure. Yeah. We would just
That doesn't feel good.
compartmentalize.
Never mind. Move on.
um Continuing this absurdist line of questioning, Laura asks, have you given any thought to how Shade can help Jeffrey grow and mature as a sentient being, since Shade is kind of his mother now? Um,
Oh, poor Jeffrey.
and if Ezra was still around, would she have him bring Jeffrey back to the school? Ezra is still around. He's in the greenhouse. Totally a
Right?
place to consult. I don't know if you would want to consult your herbalist friend on how best to care
Well,
for a
and that
plant.
is, um we sort of addressed this in the next episode, but I did think about, the different places that he could Jeffrey, could be placed, and the greenhouse is definitely one of those, but it does bring up the question of, are they gonna care for Jeffrey and leave him to grow and thrive, or is Jeffrey a useful tool now?
Hmm. Well, yeah, and like, is Esri gonna harvest leaves off of Jeffrey to use? And how do we feel about harvesting leaves off of Jeffrey while still allowing Jeffrey to grow?
Right. Right. How does Jeffrey feel about that? Does Jeffrey feel?
There's a there's just a whole can of worms opened by this spell,
Yeah,
in some of the most delightful and horrifying ways.
it's true, and I hope to continue opening that can of worms. It is a it is a fun spell, and I think it plays really nicely with Shade's Fey background.
Mm,
This this weird thing that she can do now,
yeah.
and so as for character development, I thought it was an interesting turn too. Um, but man, poor Jeffrey. If Shade is his mom, she is not the nurturing type.
Hmm. Yeah, that's true. Will Shade remember to water Jeffrey is really the salient question here.
I mean, as she would tell her students, like, you got to learn to survive. You got to be independent.
Hmm.
So, you know, Jeffrey should find somebody to water. That's so mean. I'm so sorry.
I'm just imagining Shade finding some archdruid to cast Awaken on Jeffrey so that he gains permanent humanoid level sentience, and you just have a sentient Kuryeva bush hanging around.
That is excellent.
Yeah,
He and Puzzle Dust could just have the grandest conversations.
it's true. Yeah, it's 1,000 gold worth of materials for that spell, so it's an investment, but maybe Jeffrey's
Oof.
worth it.
Right? Right? This is how Shade learns to nurture, is being given this I guess taking this responsibility of a plant.
It's like the home ec thing where you give it an egg.
Yes. Can you keep the egg safe? Can you keep Jeffrey alive?
Is this in fact Jeffrey?
Right. Right.
Yeah.
Oh goodness. Somebody should check that.
um, Emily inquired if there were any tips for running fights involving legendary actions. So I haven't used legendary actions a lot in this campaign. So for those of you who may never have GM'd and never have looked at a monster card, legendary actions are special actions that a monster can take between their turns. Usually they can take an action after someone else's turn ends. And usually legendary actions come in threes. So you have 3 legendary actions that you can do throughout the round. And the goal is to allow for you to have a single monster fight that the action economy doesn't work entirely in the favor of the players. But it's very easy to forget to do them because you're managing what did the players do. You may be managing other monsters in the fight. So it's really easy to just forget to do them. This was a slightly different way I set this monster up. I only gave it 1 legendary action per round, but I think this works either whether you're doing a full complement of 3 or just 1. I set a spot in my initiative list for the legendary action to occur. Rather than just waiting until I thought, oh, it's the end of one of their turns and this legendary action is great, I just wrote into my initiative list legendary action at a certain initiative count. That way, I didn't have to remember. It was right there on the page. So even if I had 3, I would probably just put them into into the initiative list at different slots, so that I remembered to take them. Beyond that, that's usually my biggest trouble. You've usually got 2 or 3 options for a legendary action, and so picking one is really just going to depend on the nature of the encounter. But that's my biggest problem is remembering that I've got them to use and remembering to put them into the initiative list so that I don't just forget how to use them. But I like using them because only having to run one monster is usually more fun for me than having to run 4 or 6 in order to present a challenge to a team. I built this one specifically for this idea by giving him his first legendary action being summon a bunch of little minions with only a handful of hit points, just to soak up some player damage and complicate things so that they can't just stand still in a circle around the bad guy wailing on him. Was kind of the point of the Mephits, or Muffets, if we prefer.
Sorry.
No, it was hilarious.
They were effective. I
Yeah.
mean, we did so much damage in that
Oh,
opening attack.
and then you guys completely stopped doing damage. Like you
Mhm.
stopped attacking them and were exclusively attacking the Mephits. At the point that you guys stopped attacking the giant, it had 4 hit points.
No.
Yeah, so for the last 2 rounds of that combat, the giant was sitting at like 4 hit points.
All we had to do was like flick it in the
While you
forehead.
guys killed Mephits or healed each other. And then finally Shade hit him with Shatter and finished it off. But yeah, I was that was delightful to me because it meant I got all of the legendary action options out one by one throughout the fight. So I enjoyed that, and the timing was great. But yeah, no, you guys messed him up in the with your ambush. That was insane. Colin was
That
really
was fun.
rolling the dice.
Oh my goodness.
He got so
His
many
damage
natural
is
20s.
insane.
It is true. So we have one last question that came in late from last week from Laura. How does the new dynamic feel from a DMing perspective without Esri, who is sorely missed, by the way, because Ari is awesome? Agreed.
He is.
I'd be interested to know from a player perspective too. From a DMing perspective, it is definitely different having just 3 players, because you don't. I mean, we've made a lot of jokes about this with Pog in game, but you don't want any of the players to feel like a third wheel.
Mhm.
And with 3 players, it's not easy to neatly split up and go off and do things. Before, you guys could pair off in different pairs and different arrangements and go off, and we have 2 little scenes where 2 people are still getting to interact. But now, if you guys split up, unless you all go in a different direction, somebody's on their own, and that makes it a little bit more difficult to keep that scene engaging and dynamic. Obviously, I'm having to plan encounters with the understanding that y'all don't have a healer anymore, which is why we added in a feat to all the characters that was a 4th edition thing called a healing surge that gives them, and you guys probably noticed they used these in the last episode, it gives them an action that allows them to spend some hit dice even when they're not in a rest. And I think that worked pretty well. It didn't feel like the fight was as overwhelming as it might have been. But I definitely, I mean, obviously the lack of a healer was very notable in this encounter.
Yes, it was.
Yeah. The other dynamic change that I have noticed, and the only one that I'm really trying to figure out how to work with, is the balance in the party shifted a lot. Because Shade and Pog are kind of naive, kind of unworldly characters who don't understand things quite often. And Ari and Esri weren't. Ari and Esri were both pretty in tune with how the world works. They both had a lot of knowledge just from their own expertise in different things. And while they weren't good at people in the same way, they were both good at people in different ways. Esri was very good at reading and understanding people. Ari was very good at talking to people. And so now you have one character who operates well in any kind of social situation, paired up with two characters who don't know how to operate in a lot of social settings. And I don't want it to feel like Pog and Shade are stupid.
Mm.
Like, I don't want it to feel like when Pog and Shade have to ask Ari to explain things to them all the time, I don't want it to come off as we're playing Pog and Shade as stupid, because they're not. That's not how we've seen them played. And so that's the only element of the dynamic that I am trying to work out how to deal with, is the way that, and it's probably highlighted by the fact that right at the point that RA decided to step away, we're in a very social encounter heavy,
Right.
intriguey thing. And so I don't want it to be Ari does all the talking and Pog and Shade just sort of hang out in the background and then ask him to explain what just happened after every encounter. I mean, obviously, once we got into a combat, it wasn't like that. Once we got out into the jungle, it was a more balanced dynamic. But since you guys do spend a lot of time in the city, just trying to manage that has been that's where I have felt it on the GM side as the role playing dynamic changes, is
That
not letting
is
anyone feel like a third wheel, and not letting RA or Pog and Shade come across as Ari's dumb friends.
mm. The second point that you made is exactly where I have felt it the most,
Mm-hmm.
is to oversimplify it. Yes, Esri and Ari are good at talking, Pog and Shade are good at fighting.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and so with Esri leaving, then Ari, or in Esri's absence, Ari is the talker.
Mm-hmm.
And particularly, like you said, it's highlighted in our current situation. It's not only talking, it's very nuanced political negotiation.
Yeah.
And so not only is Shade bad at etiquette in general, she definitely doesn't understand all of the subtext. Something she strives to. And so I have I've tried to play that part, that
Mm-hmm.
it's not, like you said, it's not just dumb friend, twiddling their thumbs in the background. Like she's trying to follow what is happening.
Mm-hmm.
But it does leave the burden. That's too negative connotative of a word, but does leave the burden on Eric to carry that conversation, and for us to get somewhere positively. Like, she could step in, but it's not going to end.
Well, yeah, and you don't want to step in and goof up what the goal of of the conversation is,
Right.
by by having Shade. But at the same time, you obviously also don't want to suddenly turn Shade into this remarkably savvy person. Like,
Right.
so it's, yeah.
Well, and it is what Ari does. And so,
Mm-hmm.
we give Ari a hard time about passing out every encounter. And so you want to give him those moments where, like, this is what you do.
Yeah.
And so trying, as a player, trying to balance that, where Ari is getting to be highlighted, but Eric isn't having to carry
Mm-hmm.
um the entire scene, is where I have felt that dynamic shift a little bit, because our A obviously would have also been in there to give insight and provide a slightly different perspective from Ari's, and they would play off of each other in that.
Yeah.
But we'll
Oh, and
figure it
that's the
out.
other thing. Yeah, is this group is so trusting.
Yes, that is what I thought is in the way that Ari and Ezri are people, um, Ezri's pessimism is to Ari's optimism. And
Hmm.
so Ezri taught Shade and Pog a lot about what to watch for. And we're just like, yeah, I understand what you're saying and believe it.
Right. Yeah. So that's very that's very noticeable for me is we're doing this political negotiation and intrigue thing, and no one's rolling insight to understand any of the subtext or to find out whether someone is being upfront with you. And
Why
that was
would we need
very,
to do
very
that, Philip?
noticeable. That was extremely noticeable
What are you
the
saying?
first time we did it, when we did the conversations with um, Last Night Namarin in the recording. Is I was just like, boy, and Ezra would have rolled an insight check here, and Ezra like just so that's a big shift in the way the party operates in a social situation and a negotiation like this.
Mhm.
That I'm noticing, and it will be interesting to see how that affects the continuation of this. But yeah, so
Yeah, and it'll give interesting opportunities for
mhm.
us, our characters, to learn in Ezri's absence of those scenes. But it is definitely a shift.
Mm-hmm. Very much so. Yeah. Well, that is all of our questions. Thank you so much, everyone who submitted questions. If you'd like to,
Yeah,
you could
thank
do so
you.
on our Discord, the link to which is down below, along with all of our social medias. New episodes of Khyber Shards drop every Monday, and new Khyber Shards answers every Friday. And until next time, thanks for rolling with us.